Welcome to the 360 Teaching and Learning Podcast. I'm Laura Gellin.
And I'm Adrian Pumphrey. And this week we talk with empathy consultant Liesel Mindrebo Mertes. We discuss how to build empathy and a culture of belonging in our classrooms.
Enjoy the episode.
Well, Liesel Mindrebo Mertes, thank you so much for joining us on the 360 Teaching and Learning Podcast.
I'm so glad to be with you both today.
We've already enjoyed your presence with us at the start of the semester. What I hadn't done before that training session on empathy is read your website, but I have since. And there was one thing that really struck me when I was reading your About page. And you mentioned, I believe that we are deformed and reformed by our encounters with pain. So you almost mentioned pain more than you do empathy. So why is pain the starting point in that journey?
Right. Well, if we all have the privilege of living long in the world, we encounter pain and disappointment, whether that is loneliness or betrayal or our first encounters with death or our own limitations. So this is a story, like that turn of phrase is profoundly congruent within my own story, which we'll probably go into at some point. But I think especially as I teach about empathy, it has to do with encountering other people's pain and our movement to, we have all of these like baseline postures. We want to make it better. We want you to get over it. And we can run the risk in talking about pain of turning it into some trite object lesson like, oh, that was hard, but aren't you so much better? Like, hasn't it made you stronger? Aren't we moving forward? And the reality is pain is painful. It does deform us. And we come out on the other side based on our support systems, our choices, our continued unfolding story, reformed as something else. And that can be beautiful. That can be resilient. It is not always. So it's alluding to some of the complexity and the mystery and the need for support.
You might say that sounds quite countercultural in terms of we often do try and avoid talking about pain, thinking about pain. I know as a Brit that's especially true. We, stiff upper lip. We just don't really talk about it. And I think there's some similarities here in the US in that we do try and make everything better. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So where do we start, especially in the school environment as teachers and learners? Where do we start in identifying pain and moving on from there?
Well, I think asking this question in the fall of 2021 leads us to some more obvious answers than it might at different points in time. So to contextualize and then answer your question. So yes, whether it's Britain or the U.S., advanced societies as a whole, like we have had so many fantastic medical, technological, sociological advances that we can make lots of things a whole lot better. Like we're used to, if there's a problem, we can fix it, we can improve upon it. And that means when we run into those really awful disruptive life events that we can't actually optimize, make faster, instantly make better, it feels totally jarring to our collective psyche. Like, oh my gosh, I'd never have to deal, like I can make everything better and faster. And so as we begin to talk about it in the schools, the first is the acknowledgement of the widespread reality that we're all sharing in, which is for everyone, we have all experienced some level of grief in the last year and a half. Grief in its definition of being confronted by unrealized expectations. And so in a learning environment, it's being able to give space and give voice to some of our shared and then also like very particularized grief. And that's been made more complex in the midst of, especially I think last year, whether I was working within businesses or not-for-profits or healthcare organizations, we didn't have like a collective space for mourning or acknowledgement. And so I think that teachers have, and administrators, people who work, they have like great power to create some of those microcosms of acknowledgement for people to be able to step into, leading perhaps with some of their own vulnerability and inviting their students to be able to create those spaces for one another as well. There's apprehension, there's some challenges to that, and maybe I'd toss it back to you guys. What have you seen in how that has looked within your classrooms and how you've led in that?
Well, I think it's really different for different teachers, right? I think there's definitely teachers who are more comfortable with the social emotional learning and giving students that space and being able to just be in that space where we're just sharing our experience. One thing that I loved about your training was, and I already sort of knew this was my mindset, but I'm definitely a Ms. Fix-It type. when someone is in pain, I want to fix it. When someone's having a problem, I want to help them. And I think a lot of teachers are that way, because that's part of our profession, is helping other people. So I know for me, it's harder to sit in that space and be comfortable with that type of discomfort. So for other teachers out there who are like me and who might have a harder time sitting in that space and just letting students talk and not being able to fix it and know that we can't fix it, what would you say we could do after a student shares, right? Because we're not therapists, we're not counselors, we're not trained to do those things, that very important work that we have trained people to do here. But when we're just in our spaces, in our classrooms, what can we do?
It's a great question. And I talk about the fix-it Franks, the ones, or Francines. It's not a gender sort of thing, but rushing in. And I think the key to that is rushing in with a solution or a help. Because actually, especially in caregiving professions, like if you go to your physician, you would want them to fix what is wrong with you. If you go to your teacher with a problem related to another student and how they have wounded you or missed you or said some comment that was actually really offensive, and they do need people to step in and be helpful. That phrase, rushing into it, a really key thing for any of these default postures is to be able to acknowledge and give space to the emotion that's presenting itself. And I talk about emotional mirroring. I use it professionally. I use it with my own children. I try to like consistently manifest that energy, which is to be able to pay attention to the emotion of the person that is presenting for you, and that can be looking at their body posture. Do they seem withdrawn or inward, or what words are they saying? Like, man, I'm devastated by this. It's just it broke me. To be able to pay attention. Okay, it seems like they are sad. And to be able to say back to them as a first sort of thing, to acknowledge that emotion, that does seem like it would be really sad. And then to say, like, that's crappy that happened. I'm so sorry. To leave them some space. And maybe a student will say back to you, or a parent, whoever you're dealing with, like, maybe you didn't get it quite right, the initial emotion. You're guessing sad. And they say, no, actually, I'm just ticked off. Like, I'm really mad. And then you can pivot and go, yeah, I see how you could feel that way. And then when you've given like that acknowledgement, because we want to be seen and heard first, most of all, then use some discretion and you can begin moving towards talking about solutions or talking about the next thing to do or how you can be helpful. Because we've all experienced, whether it's professionally or in our personal lives, that profound sense of like, you just totally missed me. You only wanted to talk about like what we should do next. Like, do you not even see me as a feeling person here? So I hope that answers some of your questions.
I like that. It's you can still go into fix-it mode, but
Yeah.
just, I see you, I hear you,
Right.
then go to fix it.
I can totally be a fix-it Frank too. And I actually remember coming back from college in one of my first summers back, and my mother, who is way more of a feeler, she was telling me about this really complicated situation with this board that she was on, and this kind of toxic chairman of the board who had totally like derailed that meeting. And of course, like, I'm a strategic thinker, and I had like 4 or 5 really good, super helpful suggestions. And I went right into those suggestions, and I watched her completely shut down. Like, her face fell, and I was like, I am giving you great stuff here. I can't believe that you are not. And she looked at me and she goes, I just can't hear that right now. I can't hear that right now. And like, I'm also an analyzer, so I remember going back and being like, how did that go off the rails so much? And we talked about it, and she was like, I just felt like you weren't even listening to me. And I was like, oh, because you were talking emotionally and I was responding strategically, And we totally went like that. And I filed away. I was like, make note. I can actually say more emotion words and acknowledge that and then go on to it. And it would make this whole thing a lot better. Because I actually do care for her as a feeling person. I just wasn't expressing that because I was so in love with my ideas and my good suggestions.
Do you have any thoughts on just thinking about when I was a student, which is a while ago now, but thinking about if I was going through something significant, I would want to sit in the back and just like curl into a ball and not be noticed at all. Right? I'm just thinking, I wouldn't really want my teacher to know about what was going on. Maybe not even, any of the grown-ups at school. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking of that student and providing a safe space for that student so that they maybe can feel comfortable to the point at which they might want to share what's going on. Do you have any advice to just create those safe spaces where the kids can feel comfortable?
Yeah, it's a great acknowledgement that not every person, not every student by base personality is going to think, I really want to share the interiority of my emotional world in this moment at school. And it's not about forcing them to do that. It is about creating a space where they feel like when they are underwater, when they do need help, that it would be available. So there's definitely a power dynamic that exists within the classroom that needs to be both respected but also finessed a little bit. So what that can look like is a teacher doesn't need to be emotionally leaky. Like if your marriage is falling apart and you're really having a hard time with your parent with Alzheimer's and all kinds of things, it's not appropriate to dump on your students all of that. Oh my gosh, my world is falling apart. We're all having a really hard time. Let me tell you what just happened to me. Like that's inappropriate for the classroom. But if you do have a lot of things going on and you have a wider acknowledgement of the reality that no matter what context we're showing, if you're showing up to work, if you're showing up to school, if you're showing up, to some social event, we all have a lot that's going on. So to be able to, if you've come off of a weekend that has been rough and you're exhausted, you look out in your classroom and you see a lot of people detached, maybe a few different stories, be able to just acknowledge it's a lot that we're all going through right now. I know that even in this last weekend, I was feeling the pressures of things just being off in my own world. And then we're still coming back to school, not quite being what it is. And I just want to let you know, it's something that we're all going through together. And we just want to make some space to acknowledge that. And if there are things that are going on, because I know that some of you are really going through some profoundly tough things, know that I actually want to be a support. Sometimes that looks like modifying work. Sometimes that looks like just taking a little bit of extra space. And even just that acknowledgement, like you might have to have a statement like that, multiple times over the course of a semester before somebody actually believes that that's possible and available. But just creating that space. And I think that actually in school settings, we're being helped by a national dialogue that is making a lot more space for mental wellness, for people taking advantage of counseling, for people needing to take breaks. I can think even my daughter, she was writing her application for the National Junior Honor Society for 8th graders, and it's asking you to list all of your achievements, all of the ways that you're connected and advocating. And one of the things that she listed in her pursuit of excellence was, and that's why I go to counseling, each week to help work out. And I was like, yes, this is such a good movement that we can think that actually this is a good thing. This helps make you more of a productive student and citizen.
I'm wondering about what students and faculty are going through that's not COVID related right now. And I wonder how much that COVID, it's just taken over all of our lives in a way. And just thinking about how we can acknowledge and be mindful of students that are still going through things that are not COVID related
Right.
in our classrooms. And I know, from a teacher's point of view, there's a danger to be like, oh, everything's awful. So we kind of just all lump it all into one acknowledgement. And there might be a student that's having a really hard time with something that's going on with the family or health issues. I'm just thinking, how do we make sure that we're still helping that student,
Right.
even in the age of COVID?
Can I feel free to punt that back to you guys a
Yeah.
little bit? Because I'm struck that you guys are kind of subject matter experts of the continuing stress within your student body. Like, what are you finding is working or not working, and managing that dynamic of not just generalizing everything, but being aware of the particularities of students within your classes?
Thanks for the question. I think what's been key more than ever, I don't know if this is especially with the middle school, but has been those times which is not academic, where we can go outside, we can take masks off, thank goodness, this year. We can take masks off outside, which has been huge, just because we've been able to see our kids' faces, which has been so nice. So those times when we can just be social with the kids and talk to them about things that are not academic have been more important this year than at any other time. It was important anyway to get to know your kids and to build a rapport, but I just think that has become a huge priority for school right now, is to socialize, be human, to be human together. And so advisory period, we do an hour-long advisory period once a week. That time, I think, is more important than ever. I think the mornings when kids come in, more important than ever. So just these times to connect are just huge, really, from feedback we've got from parents and from students, is that they are doing overall, they're doing quite well because of these times.
No, I agree. I think, honestly, being outside is a huge part of it. So both Adrian and I teach summer school, and we would sort of take breaks at the same time some days. And we was like, let's get the kids to mingle. Let's take them out on a walk. We'll go to Murat Park across the street. And those were the moments I felt like where things were most normal and where it was easiest to connect with each other as just people. I think it's really easy. I mean, especially when you get into high school and you get into those upper levels, and you're like, we've got standards to meet, we've got things to do, we have goals here. We've got all this work to do. That they start to become students first and people second sometimes for some teachers, and I know I do that sometimes during really busy times of the year. And what I love about coming back, especially in the fall, or having those moments where you're like, let's go outside today. It's a beautiful day. Let's just go and have class outside, is that you remember they're people first.
Right. Well, and I love that impulse, because acknowledging the human side, acknowledging the people first aspect, really means that if there are disruptive life events that they do need help in, that they could benefit from extra support, they are more likely to be able to share. And that's not something to be feared. I think, I referenced that apprehension. Sometimes there's this apprehension of like, oh my gosh, I'm not a trained counselor. I don't want to blur like the teacher-student line, which is a real thing. But to be able to, even if you are just a conduit, to be able to acknowledge pain and point them to better resources. Like, if as a school committed to whole person thriving, which I know is something that Park Tutor values, like, we have never been productivity machines, whether that's in our jobs as adults or in our lives as students, just to turn out papers and achieve on standardized tests. Like, as integrated people, the disruption in our outside of school life really profoundly does affect our inside of school performance, and especially as stewards of so much time that students get to spend. Like, they spend more waking hours in the halls of this building than they do in their homes. Mm-hmm. And to be able to be a place that helps steward their emotional care to responsible resources and encourages them to be able to get help as necessary is good teaching. It's good acknowledgement of, the realities that have always affected our academic world.
Speaking of people first, other faculty are also fellow people, and just thinking about the difference with showing empathy to students as we would colleagues?
Teachers can sometimes function like entrepreneurs. You know, they have their own realm out of which they have authority, and they have room to be creative, and they're existing in these small spinning spheres next to other academic entrepreneurs. And because there's so much that you pour into your students, to really look at the person in the classroom next to you and to think like, I don't really have time for you or your stuff. Now, everyone would want to think that there's like a collegial air and we care about each other, but the reality is, it's really easy to be tapped out right now. I shared in the training, there's a great, like a pretty evocative little story that I encountered in the work of David Kessler, who writes a lot about grief. And he told this story talking about doing hurricane relief, of coming into these communities that had been ravaged, I think it was by Hurricane Katrina. And he just felt like, I just need to be down there to be helpful. And he talked about the people that, I mean, so many homes were destroyed. These local people that were giving care were not people who had been unscathed, but people just showing up with pizza in these really, really ravaged communities. That related to the parable of the long spoons that I will then tie back to Park Tudor. But Kessler, as he was reflecting on this, he told this story about this man who's taken by a spiritual guide to this room with this long table, and there's this sumptuous bowl of soup in the middle, but everybody is starving because they're trying to dip in with these long-handled spoons, and they can't get the soup to their mouth. It's dribbling out everywhere. And the guide says to the man, this is what hell looks like. And the scene changes. It's the same room, same table, same soup bowl, same long-handled spoons, but everybody is well-fed, and there's laughing, and there's this collegial spirit, because the people have figured out how to dip into the soup and feed the person across from them. And the guide says to the man, this is what heaven looks like. And as Kessler reflected, and really as I've seen in educational institutions, in healthcare institutions, these frontline workers, there's a profound sense of lack. Everybody's experiencing it. And yet, some of the best of our flourishing is figuring out how, even in the midst of that lack, to be able to, have enough to say to your coworker, hey, long day, hasn't it been? How you doing? And really mean it, not just that perfunctory way. Then we're like, how you doing? I'm fine. To have the space. Sometimes what people just need is like a kind word, and somebody to say, oh my gosh, my kids are going crazy right now too. It's really hard to manage it all, to know that they're not alone. And so as it relates to faculty, yes, the care that we can give to other faculty is huge as well. How are you guys finding that dynamic? You're living it. I am spewing on about it. Where do you find the pain points, and what has it meant to you as you have been supported by your people?
Well, I think our people, we got good people.
We do have good people.
We really do.
Yeah.
I think even just with the example that you gave of just asking people kind of how their weekend was, how their day was, and really listening and really wanting to know how it was and how they're doing and how their heart is. I know that I feel when I think about certain days when I go home and I was like, oh, such a good day today. And I stop and I'm like, wait a minute, what made it such a good day today? And it's those days when I feel connected to my colleagues, connected to my students. And we've been talking a lot about pain, and it can start there, but that's not the only place. That's not the only way. I know if I see a student who got a haircut and I just say, got a haircut, nice haircut. It really, I mean, you see their face light up and they're like, you noticed? Like, no one said anything to me today. Something as little and as superficial as just seeing something different about somebody's appearance, or seeing if somebody looks kind of down and asking them about it. But it can also be those little moments of, hey, like, when I met you and I was like, great shirt. Those little moments of just connecting with people, just on a lot of different levels. It can be a deep emotional level, but can also just be like, hey, I notice, I notice these little choices that you're making, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do think as well, just in the age of COVID, things that may not have been difficult last year or 2 years ago, as it is now, can be difficult for people now. So just day-to-day running of life and school can be really, really challenging for people. And so just acknowledging that everyone is finding life really challenging right now is a great place to start. I used to teach at a school in London, and I remember the principal at the end of each semester used to stay in our faculty meetings. He used to say every end of semester, everyone's feeling tired right now. Be kind to one another. And I've always remembered that. And just being, the fact that he had to say it means that we needed some intentionality, because that might not have been our default. And so, when we walk into school, I kind of have to remind myself of that. Sometimes I might not feel like this because I'm having a hard time myself. But I need to be intentional about being kind to people. And just, if someone has missed something or messed something up in some way, I might need to just have a little bit of grace right now. Right. And just be like, you know what? We're all just getting through this. I need that normally, but especially now. That intentionality to be kind and graceful
Yes.
To our colleagues.
Well, and, sometimes pushback that I can get is, does empathy mean agreeing with everything the other person is saying? Does empathy mean not having standards, whether that's for work being turned in or in the professional world? Like, what if somebody is actually dropping the ball on deliverables? Like, how does empathy coexist within that? And I really do a lot of saying those things are not in opposition to each other. You can hear someone's point of view and be able to say something like, I acknowledge how you could feel that way. I see what led you there. Now, I might not agree with that. And in fact, like, even that mature pivot in the world of social discussions, political discussions, to be able to say, like, I acknowledge how you came to that conclusion. That doesn't mean I have to agree with it. Or I see that you're having a really hard time and that's causing you to miss these deliverables. Let's work together to see how we can help you in that, like, what would be helpful. And at a certain point, like, even in the, the world of business, I say, like, there's a compassionate and empathetic way to let someone go. Like, there's a compassionate and empathetic way to deliver a consequence as well, like this. And so it's, I think that people, cognitively, we like really clear lines. Like, I'm just a standards, but like, this is it. If you drop it, like, this is the consequence. But really, the reality is more nuanced, and it takes more of a deft touch, but that can be better for our overall thriving. And it's not an impossible thing to do. Like, people get flooded in thinking like, oh no, I'm just gonna be lost within it, and you don't have to be. It just requires some more intention and living outside of what might be your default and go-to skill sets.
What do you feel like are some of the classic pitfalls that we fall into when we have best intentions?
Yes.
But perhaps we're just going awry of the best practice.
Right. Well, this is a great question, particularly for me, because I've named them with some memorable avatars. I talk about this as the things that we have in our empathy toolkit. And it's, as you, as a listener, would hear them and identify with them, it's not from like a shame-based posture. All of these ways of missing people are the undersides of particular strengths, even as we talked about Fix It Frank. Like, these are people that are really great problem solvers. Yet, if they're deploying that in emotionally freighted situations, it can kind of make them look like an out-of-touch jerk. So, to be able to hold the context of like, yes, there's strengths in this and also things I have to be aware of. So fixing problems, I call that Fix It Frank. There's the Buck Up Bobby. And again, these are gendered names. Feel free to call it Buck Up Barbara, or, if you're a female identifying with this. That's sometimes our cousins across the ocean in British cultures can really manifest this tendency, as well as at home. It's that sense of like, there's no time for this. Like, we are about getting the job done. Please stop whatever emotional outburst you're having because it's frankly inconvenient to the tasks at hand. That's another pitfall. A cheer up Cheryl, someone who is desperately wanting to look on the bright side and not have to think about those negative things, and you're messing with the mood, and can't we just be happy? They traffic a lot in cliches or phrases like at least. If you've lived through something hard, you have definitely run into these people. This is a very American manifestation. Like, we are the land of happy meals and everything is fine. There's a commiserating Candace. This, I can be a fix-it Frank. I sometimes dabble in Bucket Bobby, but I can totally be a commiserating Candace. This is if you've had your own hard thing that has gone on and you really want to connect with the person who's sharing, and you suddenly find yourself doing most of the talking, and it's all about like, oh, well, my mother had breast cancer too, and we had to go to all these different hospitals, and have you tried all of these? And before you know it, like, the other person's story hasn't even had space to breathe. Commiserating Candaces just keep talking. Those are some of the primary ones. There are a few others. There's Joking Julie, who is always going to make a wisecrack or undermine maybe their own pain or somebody else's. There's also Defensive Dennis. This is especially happening in our workplaces as there's more and more people being able to say, like, you missed me in that, or you don't realize it, but that was actually really offensive, how you talked about Cinco de Mayo in our last meeting. And I think it's creating, a bad culture. The defensive dentist posture is like, but I didn't mean to. I didn't mean, and you totally miss the emotion because you're marshaling your resources on why you have been misunderstood. So that's like a very broad strokes brush of ways that you can miss people. And the more, like, even as there's probably one of those that felt congruent to you as you listen. And then it's introducing people to better tools in their toolkit for each of those types. But something that applies across all types is just radical attention to the person in front of you. Whether you want to rush in with a story or a solution or a commendation to just keep on keeping on. All of those tendencies are helped by really just and a great, like, just rough tool to put in your pocket is to be able to say, I'm sorry this is happening to you. That sounds hard. Some combination of like, that sounds hard, I'm sorry. And also to be able to say, tell me more, especially for talkative types like me, who, if I'm not being self-aware, I'm going to listen for about 5 seconds and talk for 50.
I love that phrase, radical attention.
Yeah.
To give radical attention. Because there's so many times when, and you see it sometimes either, like, you see it in yourself or you see it in your students where someone starts talking and then a couple hands go up, and I'm like, I know as soon as your hands go up, we don't listen anymore. So let's give, I love that. Okay, I'm going to start using that.
Yeah.
Let's give radical attention to each other.
Radical attention.
I love it.
It's such a gift. When you receive it, you realize how profoundly outside the norm it is. Like, think about it. When you're talking to someone and they, like, put their phone out of line of sight and they lean in and they're not checking the clock. And that can be hard. It can be hard in personal lives. It can be especially hard in school situations. Like, you got a class, you got the next thing. So I realize it can feel complex. But even the acknowledgement of wanting to move towards it, because the chance to build connection with someone many times is not going to feel convenient. It's not going to feel like you're at, like, a totally blissed out place where you're so ready to give and pour into other people, even in wanting to cultivate more of it. Just realize, like, the moment for connection or to pay radical attention is probably going to come when you already feel 3 minutes behind and you've had a hard morning, and yet something is still being asked of you to be able to be a little bit more human and be a little bit more supportive. So I start, especially as I work with executives, I start framing like, this is rarely going to feel convenient. Like, it is not going to slot nicely into your calendar. And it's good to just, equalize expectations.
Yeah. We have time for maybe one more question, but I was just thinking about the relationship we have with parents is a key relationship in this whole equation. What does the dynamic with parents look like in an empathetic school?
Radical attention is probably part of it, but you guys have been navigating this with your colleagues. I mean, I could give propositions, but what have you found has been most important as you're relating to parents? Because you are co-creators of a child's success. There's trust, there's agency, and there have been a lot of big contentious questions in the realm of schooling. One needs to only watch some of the televised school board meetings. What does that look like for you and your colleagues at its best?
I think it's similar in a way to interacting with students, is that the most, the more we can communicate, the more we can just have those moments, whether it's in back to school night or conferences or emails along the way, just getting to know the family, getting to know the students through the parents' eyes is crucial, really, because they're going to see things that we might not immediately see. They'll have a very different perspective to that we do. So I think anything a start of year survey has been really useful in the past. I've asked the question, what do you want me to know about your student? What is that one thing that's really important for me to know? And that's often brought out some really key things that have helped me teach better over the years. So I think just, again, connection, any chance we get.
Yes, I agree. I think being a parent has helped me be a better teacher and a better communicator with parents. I think always assuming the best, assuming they have the best intentions, assuming like they just want to love their child, they want their child to be happy, they want their child to be successful. And so if a parent is upset, it's because they likely feel threatened in one of those areas for their child. And one of our colleagues in college counseling talked about how if she ever had an upset parent, she would always sort of take it from the what are they afraid of, and kind of finding a way to sort of address that fear, and then that kind of dismantles some of the anger or some of the frustration, and then they can really kind of talk together to work through a plan how to be successful moving forward. I think about it also as, at the end of a long day, you get your kids in the car and I say, "How was your day?" "Fine." And I'm ready I'm ready to give the radical attention, and they are not ready to have the radically honest conversation with me all the time.
Not until there's been a snack, at least.
Right?
Yes.
And so I think about how, I love to know what they're actually doing in the classroom. I love that the lower school teachers send out these weekly emails of, what they learned that week. I love that there's pictures posted of our children learning, and it's the greatest thing. But we don't have that for high school students. And so I think, if I can kind of catch a moment of brilliance of a student, of just like, they were so on today, like they just nailed it today, that I'm much more quick to write that. Wow, your son was so on it today in class. He was a leader. He shined. It was so exciting. I'm so impressed. I'm so proud of him. Of just like sharing those wins. And I think that's what I'm trying to do more of this year is sort of sharing the win. Yeah. So we get to see it. We get to witness this like great moment. And mom and dad might not even hear about it when the kid gets home from school. And so, celebrating that with a parent, I think is a step in the right direction.
Well, and we're all like desperate for good news
right
now. So it feels immensely meaningful. And on the other side, parents, teachers, stakeholders, there's so much pressure on the periphery, whether that is what's going on at work or in personal life or with loved ones or about travel plans, that question, what are they fearing? Like in conversations that have the potential to be freighted, I think that can be like a release valve for people. I might not be able to control all these other things, but I'm going to control what happens with the homework here or being understood. And so to be able to contextualize that. And sometimes when there are pain points, especially because so much of communication can go on in not face-to-face mediums, I really say to be able to write back, what did you mean by that? Sometimes there can be a phrase like, I didn't quite understand what that meant. What did you mean by that? That gives people a chance to like contextualize, to not, sound quite as explosive. And I would say to any, as a parent, I found myself drafting even a quick email today to one of my children's teachers about the birthday decorate. Normally, like above the desk, you get decorated for the birthday. But my son had a doctor's appointment that morning, so the teacher put it up, but had then taken it down. And my son was very sad, and I just wanted to see if it was possible that we could get it on Monday. And it was a quick email, but I proofread it, and I was like, oh, that sounds like I'm kind of blaming her, like she didn't do that well, when really she had put it up and took it down. So I just rewrote that second sentence to just be a little extra careful, because I thought, you know what, they are just doing a whole lot. These teachers are doing a whole lot. I respect and appreciate it, and I don't want anything for me to like pile on of one thing that you didn't do well. So I'm trying to, especially over the last year and a half, 2 years, to just have an extra particular attention to the heavy lift that is going on. Yeah, because there's so much more common ground in the world of education than there are divisive issues of really how we want our people to thrive. And it's so easy for that to get lost in the mix. It's so easy for a vested interest to want to shift the conversation to being like, no, it's actually all about what divides you, when really there's a lot more that we want in the common thriving of our kids. And it's great to be able to help look at that.
Well, I think that's a great thought to finish on. But Liesel, it's just been so great to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the great work that you're doing here in your corner of the educational world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The 360 Teaching and Learning podcast is produced by Park Tudor School. Our executive producer is Brent Kenneft, and our editor is Adrian Pumphrey. To listen to previous episodes of the 360 Teaching and Learning podcast, head to 360podcast.org or subscribe by searching for 360 Teaching and Learning wherever you get your podcasts.